folks. This is Herb Stevenson. This is Natural Passages Revealing Unmarked Doors of Life. Sitting here in a finally sunny morning out in rural Northeast Ohio. Um, One of the things I want to talk about today is called coherence, or if you prefer, field coherence through presence. A lot of times we don't understand it as our reactivity. Obviously, we're not very present, but when we don't really understand this, is our presence is what creates coherence in us and in relationships. So another way of saying this is presence stabilizes the field and enables coherent action. So instead of escalating or expanding a problem, what it does is field coherence creates an alignment, a perception, an alignment of energy and action through presence, which means I'm responding instead of reacting. And in today's environment, that seems to be a really big issue with all the things happening globally, economically, and it's creating a lot of difficulty. So, what do I mean when I say that? Well, incoherent field is the energy surrounding you, and it's how you're absorbing that in. So, it creates fragmented attention. You can't focus on things as well. If you're in a conversation relation, you tend to be defensive. Um, you don't listen, so you have premature meaning making. And by not listening, what I'm saying is that you um, start conjuring up a response to somebody or making meaning before you listen to them fully about what it is they're actually saying. And so what ends up happening is our presence, our energy is diverted to this what I call storytelling or incoherent field. A coherent field, though, on the other side of it is awareness before action. I literally pause, reflect, and choose. I pay attention to my sensations. So if I'm having a reaction, I notice I'm having a reaction. What am I reacting to? It's easy to say, well, I'm reacting to them. Well, we really aren't. We're reacting to a learned behavior inside ourselves that says, when this happens, this is how I'm supposed to respond. But a coherent field is direct contact. I'm engaging you in the moment. I'm listening to you, and I'm not taking offense or getting defensive. So, in other words, it's self-defining self-organization around what's happening in the moment. A structural model, if it helps you, is anytime we're in a situation, you go through three processes. You go through activation. Something happens. You choose, am I present and stay present, and therefore have a coherent impact, or I do the opposite, which is when activated, I react and I create an incoherent impact, which basically means I add distortion to the relationship, to the communication, to what we're talking about or whoever I'm engaged with. So another way of saying this to go a little further is incoherent creates fragmentation. So there's an event, I have an interpretation, I react, and I create a distortion instead of staying fully present to the moment. If I'm fully present, I stay coherent. There's an event, there's a sensation. I'm aware of my sensation, but I'm also staying in contact with that person, that situation. And then I decide how I want to act. There is no reactivity to it. There is no automatic response. The autopilot is shut off. The interesting thing, we often refer to that as the monkey mind, or other traditions like Toltec call it a parasite, that the parasite takes over and creates the distortion because we're telling a story to ourselves and we're listening to that story and then imposing that upon the other person. So what presence does in these situations, it slows our meaning making so that we can actually stay in contact with the other person. It reduces without reactivity, there's less defensiveness, and allows us to self-organize in the moment about what is actually happening here and how do I wish to respond to it. So an example would be a team conflict. If you have an argument, somebody starts an argument, or there's, let's just say, a heated statement. I have two ways to look at it. One of the ways would be is that we engage in this tit for tat that escalates and everybody walks out. Maybe a few people feel good because they got to vent, but generally speaking, nothing comes out of it that's positive. So by shifting to coherence, the idea is you realize, okay, I hear you. So one of the ways to solve that as an example would be is I do this frequently in coaching, is I will make a statement when somebody is obviously escalating, saying, I notice that you're very passionate about this. You have a lot of energy. In fact, I wonder what the feelings or the story behind this are that you're having in this reaction to me or in a team situation. When somebody is fully present and just names the process, it returns coherency and eliminates distortion. So we're not, distortion is the storytelling between individuals, which are their reactivity, whereas coherence is staying fully present to the situation and naming exactly what's happening. So presence invites sensation. Insight emerges naturally by somebody holding that space in a coaching example, or it could be actually in any situation, any relational situation. And the idea is I stay long enough to feel the sensation, and then and acknowledging that sensation, I begin to make a meaning of how do I wish to respond to this and not react out of it. Because remember, reactions or reactivity is learned behavior that's automatic, you're on autopilot, and it usually creates a train wreck. That's why I'm calling it distortion. So an idea of how this happens when I say that is as an incoherent, a field marker for incoherency is we feel pressure, urgency, need for speed to respond. It's almost like a defensive or protective mechanism. Where coherence is, it's a pause, wait for clarity about what's happening and how you decide you want to respond to the situation. So one of the ways there's multiple ways. One is called pause, breathe, feel your body, ask what is here. I like to say pause, reflect, choose, because any reactivity has no reflection whatsoever. We're thinking with our animalistic brain or our amygdala, uh, which is our emotional reactivity. And so when we ask, what is here and who am I dealing with? And we then ask, how do I want to respond in a way that's appropriate to the situation, keeps me in contact. So a practice is to frequently is slow things down so you sense, feel, then respond from awareness. And the interesting part is because sensation and leads to emotional interpretation, that's where the fuel of all reactivity occurs. And so what we're trying to do at this point is to get you to realize, slow down a little bit and feel yourself. Notice how you're having an impact, but do it without judgment. It's not a tit for tat, or it's not an attack. It might be, but that doesn't mean you have to engage that and go into a full conflict. So you could also look at a field naming in that situation. I kind of alluded to it in a second, but you can ask yourself, what's happening in the room right now? That's the naming process. What's happening and saying, well, I'm noticing that the two of you are engaging in a very heated conversation. Anybody want to help me understand how we got to this point that this is the type of meeting we're having? And it shifts the focus out of the reactivity into what's really happening. And we began to unravel that and saying, well, is there a way for us to express our feelings, our passions, whatever it is, in a way that allows us to remember, especially on a team, we are on a team, and the best of both of us is what will lead to our success. So the interesting thing is coherence cannot be forced. It emerges when interference is removed. So in other words, just saying it means that you start to your presence, constantly checking in. Can I do this? You've heard me in prior podcasts say is if you're feeling ungrounded and not present, the simplest way is to create body sensation. So you wiggle your toes, feel yourself sitting in your seat. You can do things like move your hands, take a deep breath, and I call it the pause, reflect, choose syndrome. So when you do that, your energy, your thought process stabilizes because now instead of reacting, you're actually trying to allow something to emerge about how you wish to respond. So that means you eliminate not only interference, but what is ultimately called distortion. So when you're working with anybody, any relationship, this can be, with your partners, family members. I'll give you some examples here in a second of how it actually can work. But presence is a field condition, which means it's an energetic field that we have created. In a lot of businesses now, they're doing constellations, which is a field condition or field dynamic that is it's just like a locked-in energy, act, react, that is a tit for tat. But coherence is observable and experienced. Uh, it, and when I say that, it's observable when you realize if you stay calm, you have an impact on other people, and they experience it just the same way as they suddenly take a deep breath. So I was recently in a conversation with somebody saying is that a decision was made by a couple of siblings who realized the field dynamic of the family was that somebody, a parent or somebody, would throw out a, let's just call an emotional bomb, and everybody would react. And it went on and on and on. And the two siblings realized, well, let's just stop reacting. Let's just acknowledge this is a dynamic, but let's see what happens. And in doing that, it completely changed the dynamic of how the family interacted. So there was no more emotional bombs thrown out there periodically to create reactions. It became a situation of the unexpected because the siblings now watching and accepting without judging did not create the expected reaction, which led to the one throwing the emotional bomb to back up and then consciously or unconsciously began to ask the question, what's going on here? Which then gets them out of their amygdala hijack, gets them out of their emotionality, and they begin to look at other ways to do it. I frequently have done this with other individuals. I've worked with people who were very antagonistic to me originally because they were defensive, had an idea of what coaching was about. And in their antagonism, I would just describe it, saying, "Is I know you're feeling you're being quite antagonistic and trying to be provocative." And I said, "Is that the engagement you want? Because do you want, an all-out war between the two of us? Or is there something behind this antagonism that you're trying to get to determine whether or not you can trust me?" And it usually opens their eyes in a different way. And then the impact of it is they begin to say to themselves, well, wait a minute, it slows the process. So I want you to think about how you're putting distortion into any relational field and how is it creating incoherence, distortion, instead of is it creating coherence? The more present you are, which is consciously aware and attentive to the moment, just to the moment, not to the stories in your head, what ends up happening is you completely shift the entire energetic dynamic. So I hope this is useful to you. It's Herb Stevenson. Uh, Natural Passages Reveal the Unmarked Doors of Life. And I'm pleased to say to you that now the coaching book Bear Attention is out on Amazon. It's about how to coach from a presence point of view. And just recently, this last week, Bear Awareness has come out. And that book is about literally about awareness. So it's for anybody. It's not just for coaches. It's for anybody who wants to create more understanding of awareness, distortion, things of these natures. So you can find them on Amazon. There'll be another book coming out that I've been working on for quite a while called The Calling. And eventually there'll be one on Gestalt team coaching. And I wish you well. And I thanks for listening. Take care and be well. Bye bye.